background from public service BBC, a long career there. And then you moved to the New York Times in 2012.
Yeah.
So what are the differences between or being a top manager in Europe versus in the States?
You know, I honestly, I think that we're going through something. We're all going through something, and I feel like you're a mountaineer, and you kind of move from the Alps to the Himalayas, and you get to the mountain, and it's like the rock face looks very similar. It's like all of the pressures and both the external pressures, but also it's like the psychological barriers and the kind of things you're wrestling with inside an organization, you know. Everyone says they want to change, but most people, what they mean by that is they want change as long as it doesn't involve any actual change. They kind of...
Exactly.
And so to me, the similarities are much stronger than the differences. But it's America, and America means something around a kind of spirit of trying things. I mean, it's a cliche, this, but in my experience over many years working with Americans and now working for a big American company, there's just more of a sense of the possibility of reinvention. And one of the reasons I took the job, even though a lot of my friends said you've got to be crazy, I met enough people at the Times to believe they were serious about change, and they were prepared to do kind of whatever it would take and go through a lot of uncertainty and discomfort to actually achieve something great.
I will get back to the question about organization and change in the New York Times later. I just want to ask you first, being British in the States, what concerns you most right now, Trump or Brexit?
I always say to Americans, you know, before you decide to abandon your constitution and go for a parliamentary system, you know, come and talk to me first, because there's more than one way a country can completely screw up its politics. Yeah. What I want to say, though, is both left and right, again, it's the same point, really. What I do think about American politics is, and you can see it on the right as well as the left, that idea of we can reinvent ourselves, and even if things have gone badly wrong, we can come back with new ideas. I think that is very present there, and I think that you can feel in the UK and some other European countries this kind of creeping, almost like paralysis of maybe we can't change, maybe there's nothing we can do, and you know, I think Brexit in particular, I now think Brexit is like, it's a play by Samuel Beckett. It's kind of on attendant on Brexit, where the whole point is nothing happens, Brexit never arrives, life is meaningless, you know.
Waiting for Brexit. Okay, so I'm interested in learning or understanding more about your subscription strategy.
Yeah.
You have this ambitious goal of reaching 10 million digital subscribers, maybe even more, in a few years from now. And you've obviously cracked the code, right? You get, I think it's 200,000 new digital subscribers every quarter now, which is impressive. But how many of the 10 million subscribers do you think will actually come from the core product of New York Times?
I think most of them, actually. I think that although we've got other pretty good products, we've got a crossword product, cooking product, we've just launched a parenting product in beta. And there'll be more other products. We've got our great Wirecutter consumer testing sites. We have other products. They'll contribute some. But to be honest, the business of the New York Times is fundamentally about making the main news, opinion, and feature New York Times edition, which is now the smartphone edition is the most important, but there's also desktop and there's print and so on. And that central investing in that, developing it and growing it is by far the biggest part of what we have to do. And I want to say, I think it's a very simple thing we're trying to do. I mean, it's two layers to this. The first layer is a fundamental belief that the world wants great journalism. If you invest in journalism, this is a phase in the history of news where you have to invest. If you invest in newsrooms, you build up your newsroom, you get the best journalists in the world, and you try and get more each year so you can make the product richer and deeper. People will want to consume it. you can, because they fall in love with the product and it becomes part of their lives, you can convince them to pay, and the money they pay will pay for more journalism. So almost like a philosophical level, we've got a very simple idea, which interestingly is very similar to what Reed Hastings and co are doing at Netflix. They're pouring money into high quality television content in the hope of finding an audience and getting this kind of virtuous circle to work. So that's the kind of top layer of what we're doing. At a practical level, we've been trying very hard to master all of the expertise and the kind of testing and learning capabilities in data science, in product design, in every aspect of digital marketing. So from the first contact with the user to the whole issue of retaining them as very long-term subscribers, we're masters of the tactics and expertise. But that's not as important as his first point, which is, in the end, this is about making a great, wonderful journalistic product. And then finding an audience to support it.
And can you tell us more about how you drive innovation in that kind of editorial product every day better?
Yeah, and I think I don't ever want to say the word driving it, because I don't think innovation happens with senior leaders like Napoleon, sort of,
So how do you make it happen?
Allowing it to happen. It's much more about not getting in the way of it. Most of the innovation is going to come from the middle of the organization. It's going to come from, as it were, some of your most kind of disputatious and maverick colleagues. It's not going to come with a business plan which makes much sense. It doesn't suit the kind of bureaucracy of a pre-existing company, and kind of the HR department and the finance department and the legal department. So a lot of this is about, can you create spaces where people can just try stuff? And I think one thing I learned the hard way really is you shouldn't try and judge experiments or new projects yourself. Because in the end, given your age and what you've seen, you'll probably be too harsh. You'll probably, and maybe you're not the audience. So I think one of the things that leaders have got to do has allow the organization to try things out which they don't believe are going to work. There have been plenty of things we've done which I did not think were going to work, which have worked, and worked big time. And I think it's more about getting out of the way of it and just allowing it to happen. All chief executives talk endlessly about how much they support innovation, and I think many chief executives go around murdering it every day. And it's kind of tragic because they think they're helping.
So is that how the podcast The Daily also came to life?
Well, it's actually I was a bit involved in that. I mean, we slowly got better at podcasts, and in particular in the 2016 US election, particularly in the fall of 2016, the last months of the election, we'd done some really quite interesting podcasting. And then there was a plan, this is late 2016, maybe we should work up to having a daily podcast. And we set a date of, I think, late 2018. It was going to launch 2 years later. And then the kind of craziness around the new government and the new president, normally politics gets quieter after elections. And this, in the case of Donald Trump, it just went crazy and stayed crazy. And we thought, we should be doing this podcast right now. And so we all decided, really, just to start doing it. And we took the decision to start the daily podcast before we'd got any revenue in place, before we'd really figured out how many people we were going to need. We just said we're going to start in 6 weeks' time. And the team just spooled it up, and there was no paperwork. They just got going with it. And actually, it's always made money. I mean, by the time we launched, we got great launch sponsors. We promised BMW, these numbers won't be exactly right, but they're roughly right. BMW, I love advertising brands who've got the guts to kind of, jump off the cliff with you sort of thing. And BMW, we promised BMW in this kind of launch phase, 3 or 4 months, whatever it was, that they'd get 750,000 listens. We'd guarantee them 750,000 listens, and we had no idea. We thought, is that a lot? Is that a little? Is that, but we thought, so we signed the contract, and we were going to, I think, compensate them if they didn't get that. And we gave them 43 million. Over that period, by the end of the 43 million people, you know, what there've been 43 million occasions of somebody listening. And so the thing has become, last year it was the biggest downloaded podcast on iTunes, and it's continuing. The numbers, it's one. I keep on looking at the charts and thinking this must be the first 3 months of the daily. It's not. It's the last 3 months. It continues to get bigger. It's about 10 million a month unique users, about 2 million on a typical day. 3/4 are 40 years old or younger, and 46%, nearly half, are 30 or under. So this is a very, very young audience. And that idea, which broadcasters, including me, have cherished for decades, that the truth is old people like speech on radio and audio, and young people like music, isn't true. There is a vast market for high-quality, thoughtful speech for people under the age of 30.
So the daily is actually an engine to reach your younger audience, right?
Or to find an audience, and as an engagement tool, 20 minutes. I mean, people listening, typically finding it today, I mean, this may change in the future, but finding it on iTunes or finding it on Spotify. These are, as I said, a very young audience, 20 minutes of engagement a day on a smartphone. 20 minutes. This is a kind of different level of engagement. And yeah, we're experimenting on how to encourage them to subscribe and so on. And it's not impossible that ultimately the daily will itself become a partly or completely subscription product. That's a credible pathway. But our basic view about everything we do is first find the audience, then try to engage them and delight them, and then think seriously about how you're going to then turn it into money.
And myself, coming from, you know, the outskirts of Europe, the Daily is actually maybe a stronger brand now for many Norwegians than your main brand. So I'm curious to know if you're thinking differently now about your international audience in general than you did when you first came to the...
It's constantly, no, I would say that's constantly evolving. I mean, the enormous complexity that we're wrestling with. This is not necessarily a bad thing, but or at least not bad in the context of media strategy, which is that Donald Trump and the global fascination with Donald Trump, what we've started getting serious about building international audiences, ironically at a time when thoughtful people around the world are completely intrigued by what's going on in America. And so if I show you this chart of unique users, and laid across it big events in the story of Trump, and then asked you, is that a domestic audience or a global, a non-US audience, you wouldn't tell. They look very similar. But we've been trying to build up our coverage of Europe. We've been, I think, doing a very good job, for example, covering Brexit. We've beefed up in other English-speaking countries. We've got more journalists than we've had ever in Canada, in Australia. We're investing heavily in Hong Kong and Asia, and in particular stories like the global story of tech and the kind of geopolitics of tech. We're trying to cover it on a worldwide basis. And nowadays, we have bureaus in London and Hong Kong which keep all of the digital assets fresh and current all the way around the clock. So even when New York's asleep, there's someone on the bridge somewhere making sure that, even if, ironically, the story's breaking in the early hours in America, that we're covering. I mean, when I first got to the Times in 2012, at 7 o'clock in the morning in New York, which is 7 o'clock is the peak time in the US and most markets for smartphone use, 7 o'clock in the morning, there were 4 or 5 people with vacuum cleaners. The newsroom had the cycle of a daily physical newspaper, and the night team had gone home. The last copy of the paper had been printed and dispatched, and the day team had yet to arrive. So we've had to sort of, and my colleagues in the newsroom have had to work on how you think about the day and the week and the world as you think about how you make sure you're current.
And I know that internal culture is a topic that interests you a lot. So how will you describe the New York Times culture now?
The big thing is really changing. I mean, you know, one question I often ask people is guess how many millennials we have. I mean, millennials, this American term for a generation, meaning people who are currently between 22 years old and 37. And, you know, people in this age group, when I arrived at the time, were maybe about 20% of the workforce were millennials. It's 49% now. It's 49%. The side effect, this wasn't an act of policy in itself, but the effect of opening the doors and getting a lot of digital expertise in, videographers, product people, many more engineers than we've had, has been an enormous number of, as it were, young people and new people. And this is a culture which is currently being reformed in a way. What I love about the Times is the core mission of the Times, the focus on independent, high-quality journalism. If you ask our security guards downstairs what the New York Times stands for, Al and his colleagues will tell you very clearly what the Times was put on earth to do. And our new young recruits absolutely get it. Absolutely get it as well. So there's I think, a high level of agreement about what we're all trying to do. We also, by about 2015, we had a very coherent and clear view of our kind of strategic framework. But the issue of how you organize to deliver rapid evolutions of digital products, we found immensely difficult. We currently now have an organization which is mainly focused around what we would call missions in digital. So we have a engagement mission, and that's a multidisciplinary team. So it's people from our newsroom, it's data scientists, machine learning people, it's designers, product people, and engineers. And that team has got everything it needs to really drive greater engagement and we've got a subscription growth team and so on. So we're trying to organize where we still have a kind of grid of functions, but people are expecting to work on shared objectives and to work very, very closely with colleagues from other divisions. Now, I want to say, we kind of sort of thought we were doing that 3 years ago and 5 years ago. We're now really doing it. And I think the difference between doing all of these things superficially and discovering that nobody will really do anything because their host department needs to be consulted before they do it, I think we've broken through that now. So basically, we try and celebrate our failures as well as our successes. What do we learn? I've tried to do that. Again, when I started
You try to do that for real now, or?
Things go wrong. I mean, lots of things don't work. And I think one of the things I feel most proud of is a product called NYT Now, which we launched within a couple of years of my arriving, which was meant to be a short-form express version of the Times. The thesis was going to be lower price, maybe a younger audience, smartphone-centric, so it was an app-based. And the idea was to do something which was more visual, more immediate, and less constrained than the master New York Times, even on smartphone then was trying to be almost like a mini physical New York Times. And NYT Now, it's like everyone loved it and nobody subscribed to it. It was like one of those things which, you know, was a kind of great kind of critical success and didn't work commercially. But we took everything we learnt from it and reverse engineered it into our main product. And actually, we got like a 3-year jump on the future because of this thing which hadn't worked. And I just say, one of the big things is not to misunderstand what's really going on in your organization. And almost always, experiments are going to be useful. And they may be really useful when you find out something which doesn't work. That's okay, but lots and lots of experiments. So at any one time with our pay model, we've got often dozens of experiments going on at the same time. We used to do that and not be very rigorous about learning from it. Now we're getting better and better at the business of also learning from the experiments and applying the lessons from the experiments into the business.
So you're the CEO. The publisher of the Times is actually from the owning family.
Yeah, A.G. Salzberger, yeah.
Can you tell us how the dynamics between the two of you work, and in particular, you know, in the digital journey that you've been through?
Yeah, so I mean, the way it works, the New York Times is a complicated old thing. I have to say, having come from the BBC, it feels like blessed simplicity. So you know, I always say, when people say it must be very odd having a family and a board of independent board of directors, and I say it depends what you're used to. The notion is you've got a controlling interest. The shares, the family shares are, which have, although they're a small minority of the economic interests of the company, they can fire the board and they can take control of the company if they need to. The idea is to have a long-term interest which is wholly dedicated to the independence and quality of the Times' journalism, and where by tradition there is a publisher who is ultimately responsible for the editorial content of the Times, and by the way, for hiring and firing the editors, who is kind of above the hurly-burly of the, if you like, the public company and the business of this year's budget and all the rest of it. And I think it's been a strength for us. And I think one of the reasons we've got the strategy we've got is because of that presence. Now, coming from a public service broadcaster, this whole approach happens to fit my view of the world like a glove. And I suppose one of the things I brought with me is the idea that actually this is the best way of gaining credibility with audiences. And the whole idea there should be a tussle between what's the best strategy for the business and what's the best strategy for the mission of the New York Times. My view basically is the business of the New York Times is high quality journalism. You know, put very crudely, if you're Rolex, you want to make super high quality watches. It's fairly obvious. If you're Rolls Royce, you want to make great cars. There's no point in having the company without the greatness of the vehicles from a purely commercial point of view. So in practice, Arthur Ochs-Sulzberger was publisher when I arrived. His son, Arthur Gregg Sulzberger, who's reached the advanced age of 37. He's been in the job 1 year. He's already had 2 very public run-ins with the President of the United States, where he's, in my view, handled himself and the New York Times magnificently. So he's already Arthur Gregg's a journalist. He's grown up in multiple newsrooms, but notably in the New York Times newsroom, and he's a fierce defender of what the Times stands for. We actually see eye to eye, and this with the strategy, in many ways, the strategy which has emerged. Many people have been involved in making it. I think it's the company's strategy rather than any individuals, but both Arthur Gregg Sulzberger, long before he became publisher, and I as chief executive have been 2 of the main architects of this strategy, and we've been allies in really trying to get the entire organization to see not just the urgency, but to try and turn the sense of urgency into actual action and change, and to build on our successes and really get some momentum. So that's been very positive, I think.
So we have to talk also about your competitors. Who do you think is your biggest competitor right now?
Well, I think I'll speak for many of the organizations in this room. I say our fate it's no longer the traditional battle for advertising with other news publishers, or even, I think, significantly yet, certainly a battle for subscriptions, or even for readers. People who are interested in news will read lots of different sources. The major platforms are significant. I think that Google, Facebook, I mean, they are competitors to the extent they're competing with us for people's attention. But even things when they compete with each other, when the battles they're having, these titanic battles between the platforms, can lead to consequences which, through no ill intention, can end up being incredibly damaging for publishers.
Like what?
Well, I think that for example, historically, I mean, this has got a happy ending, this one. Google's absolute determination to become the lead search engine, and the fact they wanted people to have a great experience in search, meant that for many years they were prejudiced against news publishers with subscription models. And if somebody searched for you and discovered they were going to have to pay a subscription, the Google algorithm would massively penalize you and you wouldn't be discovered anymore. Now Google's changed that and is now allowing publishers to set their own business rules for when you appear in search without penalizing them. That's a good example of a major platform eventually listening to us and changing its policy to help publishers. But that would be an example. Google didn't have that policy because they wanted to hurt news, I don't believe. They did it because they wanted to make a great search experience. But the consequence is the same. If you're going to go out of business because of something or you're going to be damaged by it, it doesn't really matter whether it was intentional or not.
So what kind of relationship do you think the Times will have with Facebook and Google going forward? Well,
I think that I want to say the first thing is we don't ever want to be too reliant on any platform. Example of that, we decided some years ago, at a time when it was very unfashionable, that we wanted to be a destination. We wanted people to come to the Times, to come to the mobile web, to come to our apps, actually to come sometimes to our physical newspaper, to come to us and to consume our journalism in our branded environment. And so we never wanted to be too reliant on the Facebook news feed or YouTube or one of these other platforms. Why? Because people don't know it's from you. Secondly, because almost always the monetization is somewhere between disappointing and hopeless. So the economics don't work. You can't control pricing. You end up competing with the platform themselves, and they've got thousands of engineers at vast audiences and much more data than you're ever going to have. So you're going to lose. I mean, I think one of the basic rules of digital strategy is don't fight battles you can't win. Find somewhere you can find a battle you can win.